This program is brought to you by cable franchise fees and generous donations from viewers like you.
Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to start by calling to order the meeting of the Amherst School Committee at 6:31 p.m. And we'll start with a roll call attendance. Mr. Demling.
Demling present.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington present.
Ms. Lord.
Lord present.
Ms. Spitzer.
Ms. Spitzer present.
And McDonald present. And I will turn it over to Chair Hall.
All right, I'll call to order the meeting of the Pelham School Committee at 6:31 and start with roll call attendance. Mr. Menino.
Menino present.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny present.
Ms. Stancer.
Stancer present.
Ms. Barlow.
Barlow present.
And Hall present. Thank you, Chair McDonald.
And now I'll call to order the meeting of the Regional School Committee, also at 6:31 p.m. And we'll start with roll call attendance. Mr. Demling.
Demling still present.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington present.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny present.
Ms. Lord.
Lord present.
Ms. Seeger.
Seeger present.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer present.
Ms. Stancer.
Stancer present.
Mr. Sullivan.
Sullivan present.
And McDonald present. Great. Our first item is public comment, and we have a large amount of public comment. So I will start with the voice messages that we've received, and I'll also direct the community that's watching at home to our website, the Regional School Committee Agendas page. The public comment document of all the email public comment is already posted there. So feel free to navigate there while we're playing the voice comments.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Page. I live in Amherst, and I'm the parent of...
Sorry?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Page. I live in Amherst, and I'm the parent of a Crocker Farm sixth grader. I want to urge the committee members to not vote in favor of the motion committing to in-person learning for all students for the next academic year. First, I fear that doing so would be setting yourself up for failure as a school committee. There are any number of reasons that in-person learning could be interrupted in the next school year, and if that happens, you will have eroded trust with the community that we made a commitment and then had to change course. I realize that the motion contains very broad language about safety guidelines and health conditions, but that's not what people will remember. They will remember that you committed to something and then couldn't deliver. Second, making a commitment like this without collaborating with the APEA is highly problematic and sends the message that you don't see our educators as partners. I don't see how you can possibly fulfill this commitment without the support of the APEA, which the motion does not even mention. Third, I know from attending the open meeting on February 4th that some parents are asking the school committee to make this commitment to in-person learning starting in the fall. But I would urge you to proactively reach out to families you don't usually hear from, families with fewer resources who don't attend meetings or send emails or make public comments, so that you don't assume that this is what all or most families want. As elected officials, your obligation is to represent all families, not just the most vocal ones. Thank you. Hi, my name is Amber Connell Martin. I live in Amherst, and I'm the parent of a Wildwood fourth grader and a 5-year-old who will be starting kindergarten in the fall. I want to urge the school committee members to not vote in favor of the motion committing to in-person learning for all students for the next academic year. Why is this resolution being considered now? We are currently in the month of February, a full 6 months away from the start of the next school year. If there is anything this pandemic has taught us, it is to expect the unexpected. I understand there's a lot of pressure on the school committee right now from some families to make a commitment right now to in-person learning in the fall. But as leaders in the Amherst community, it is important for you to take the process of planning out the 2021 to 2022 school year in an intentional way, including all stakeholders involved and taking into account the most current information about the number of cases of COVID and how the virus is spreading or not in our community. It would be irresponsible to make the kind of commitment you are considering making tonight without doing so. So what does the right process look like? It looks like waiting a few more months until our whole community has access to the vaccine and we are closer to the beginning of the next school year to actually understand what the conditions are. It looks like proactively reaching out to the families that don't often show up at school committee meetings to find out what their needs are, and then working together creatively to address them. It is not enough to send out surveys by email because not everyone uses email. Administrators, teachers, student and parent representatives, and specialized instructional support personnel, facilities managers and custodial staff, transportation personnel, food personnel, and family service representatives should all be engaged in this process. Also, the school committee cannot make this commitment without first sitting down to negotiate with APEA, just as they did for this school year. You cannot make a commitment to all in-person learning without taking that step. And then finally, all in-person learning shouldn't necessarily be the goal. There are some families that will still not be able to take that risk. Folks who are immunocompromised, who can't take the vaccine for whatever reason, or who have family members who are at high risk. Thank you.
My name is Laura Muller. I live in Amherst, and I am a parent of a Wildwood third grader. We have been justifiably occupied with schooling in the pandemic. We should also remember our commitment to examining racial justice in the Amherst school. The two are connected. How we emerge from the pandemic will set a tone for how we address race and class. We should see our planning as a turning point, not a return to the ways we have always done things. That may not be helpful as we prepare for a new normal. The newest CDC guidance gives us a roadmap as we plan to restart in-person schooling. They urge the engagement of the entire school community, including administrators, teachers, student and parent representatives, specialized instructional support personnel, facilities managers and custodial staff, transportation personnel, food personnel, and family services representatives as we plan. I write to ask that we slow down the process of committing to in-person school for the rest of this year through volunteer teachers, as well as the process of committing to fully in-person school for the 2021 school year. We should be engaging our entire community in these discussions through outreach and meeting people where they are, with a focus first on families who've had the hardest time in the pandemic and the concurrent economic downturn. The weather will be warm soon. The district should not rely on surveys to gather input. Important voices may not be able to participate. We should have outdoor listening sessions at school large drop-off sites, apartment communities, school grounds, and parks. We had similar sessions for consensus building around the current elementary school building project several years ago. We should do the same now. We should not miss the opportunity to bring the community together around these questions. A hastily planned return to school buildings will also damage our chances of reaching consensus around at least two important conversations in our district now: school start times and moving the 6th grade to the middle school. While I understand the desire to have students in buildings now, I urge you not to rush the process in order to have valuable community conversations to get us to a more equitable and inclusive environment for all of the district's students.
Yes, hello, this is for public comment. My name is Catherine Corson. I'm from Amherst, and I'm a parent of an elementary school child and a middle school child. First, I want to thank you and the district staff who have worked above and beyond this year to create such a positive experience for our children as a whole at this incredibly difficult time. And I want to recognize Ben Harrington's exceptional and important letter in the Gazette last week and urge those who haven't read it to do so. I urge the school committee to focus on maintaining collaborative relationships with the district and unions in preparing for a carefully planned and well thought out return to in-person learning for those who want it this spring as well as in the fall. One that celebrates and works to retain our amazing educators and staff as well as students. It is complicated to ensure that all staff and children, remote and in person, have the support they need and a safe learning environment. I am concerned that a rushed piecemeal process of voluntary return will threaten the positive relationships that our children have already formed this year, forcing changes in teachers, classrooms, and even schools. Secondly, while there are many families who want to return in person, there are also many families who want to continue remote learning. And it is important that the emphasis on in-person education doesn't negatively affect those families and educators who want to stay remote.
To this end, I urge the district to survey families to ask how remote learning is going and what they prefer for the remainder of the year as well as next. It is important to have as representative a sample as possible of our diverse community, and to be transparent with families about what the in-person classroom will look like. Third, I urge it to prioritize those children for whom remote learning is not working first, and is identified collaboratively by families and educators working first from the side agreements that are already under discussion. Finally, I am concerned about the draft resolution about the fall. While I recognize and support the desire to reassure parents and guardians worried that the Amherst schools will be remote again in the fall, I encourage the inclusion of wording that recognizes again the diverse situations of our district staff and families, particularly as it seems likely that a vaccine will not be available to children under 12 and may not even be available to older children by the fall. I would urge you not to signal that the district is foreclosing options for families or staff who may not feel comfortable returning in that context. Here I note that the new CDC guidance on reopening schools includes some very clear guidelines on other community closures, prioritization for at-risk populations, and higher risk areas where our community unfortunately currently stands. Finally, there have been some amazing pedagogical benefits of remote learning, and I hope that we can collectively use the next few months to capture these and to explore through educator-led processes creative options such as more outdoor learning. Thank you again for your service and the opportunity to provide comment.
Hi, my name is Liz Markovitz. I live in Amherst. I have two kids in the public schools here, one at Fort River and one at the middle school. And I'm calling today because I know that y'all are probably going to vote tonight on a statement that states the committee's commitment to reopening in fall 2021, the full in-person reopening for the schools. I know in the case of our own family, this is a critical part of our planning for the future. Starting immediately, it already feels too late. Without a hard commitment to open the schools in person this fall, we have to consider things that would be unthinkable to us before, for all the years we've lived here, like moving out of Amherst. Or looking at private school options, which is really the last thing we want to do. We want our kids in diverse public schools, and Amherst has always been so appealing to that, but the toll that it has taken on our family is just too severe at this point. And we have to look at another option for the health and, frankly, safety of our children at this point. It's all been pretty unthinkable thinking about leaving Amherst. And I know many families are in the same boat. But I do not want to need to be on public stage explaining my children's mental health status. So frequently I actually hate being put in that position, but I think as the local pediatricians and healthcare workers can attest, it is severe, and I'm so afraid that something terrible is going to happen with the kids in our community because I see it happening in slow motion right now, and I'm afraid it's going to erupt. And I love Amherst and I want to stay here, so I hope this can happen. We need to know for our own family's decision making and for the community's decision making. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing what comes of it. Thank you.
Dear School Committee, my name is Renata Shepard. My children are in 2nd and 5th grade in Amherst, and I am calling in support of your statement of commitment to reopen in fall 2021. As a matter of fact, such commitment should be made this coming spring as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for your initiative.
Hi, my name is Layla Keo. I live in the town of Amherst, and I wanted to call to tell you that I support having a statement that our schools will be back in person in the fall. And I totally support that. I'm concerned that we not link that reopening to vaccinations. I don't think that's
necessary, and I don't think that's the guidance that we're receiving from the CDC currently. And I also think that the CDC and other guidelines are saying that even without vaccinations, that we need to have, especially the elementary, and at minimum, the elementary schools open right now, which would mean also in the fall. So I support an in-person learning for the fall, but with those caveats, I think, to the statement that is being voted on. Thank you. Bye-bye.
My name is Sheila Jones of Amherst, and I'm a parent of a sixth grader and a senior at the high school. I want to urge school committee members to not vote in favor of the motion committing to in-person learning for all students for the next academic year. The CDC states a successful school reopening strategy requires engaging the entire school community to establish a safe environment for all educators, school staff, and students, and promote trust and confidence. School reopening planning should include, at a minimum, administrators, teachers, student and parent representatives, and specialized instructional support personnel, including school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists and nurses, as well as facilities managers and custodial staff, transportation personnel, food personnel, and family services representatives. The current fall 100% in-person resolution makes no provision for such collaboration of all stakeholders. And by committing to it as it is currently written, we lose the valuable opportunity to fine-tune a multifaceted strategy that includes a hybrid option, and an all-remote option for families who require it. Why would we slam the door on this opportunity that the CDC has emphasized is so critical, especially when the summer break affords us the time to do it? If this premature resolution is passed now, and there hasn't been a dedicated and thorough school community-wide collaboration on alternative learning modes, what happens when a new COVID variant, an unsuccessful or unavailable 12 and under vaccine, and or skyrocketing caseloads force schools to return to hybrid or fully remote learning? We have the chance to get it right this time, and we know the cost of not getting it right. This resolution sounds outwardly great, but it would actually hinder the success of a robust and thoughtful learning strategy plan. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Heather Sheldon on behalf of the board of the Amherst-Pelham Special Education Parent Advisory Council. Thank you to all involved who contributed to recent steps to get more students into buildings learning face-to-face with teachers and specialists. Our schools have been closed to in-person instruction with teachers and specialists, regardless of individual education plans that call for services like occupational therapy that can only be meaningfully delivered in person for almost a year now. This has serious, long-term implications for many students. Virtual learning means no learning for a great many of the students designated to be in phase 1. For a variety of reasons, schools remain a safe haven for many of our students, and there are significant barriers to providing instruction elsewhere and through different means that are impacting whether many of our students are getting an education or the services they are entitled to at all. While our comments above are centered on students with significant disabilities, we know that students have a broad spectrum of abilities and all learn in different ways. Just as robust remote learning must be an option this year, in-person learning needs to be an option for all of our students as well, to the greatest extent possible. We applaud that teachers have now been given the opportunity to teach in person. We hope this is a first step that allows us to begin providing in-person education for all the students who need it as soon as possible. Additionally, we fully support making a clear commitment to in-person learning for the fall. We surveyed our special education families in September. When asked what resources were needed to make the school experience more successful in this time of COVID, their simple answer was in-person school. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ian Walls. I live in Amherst, and I'm calling to support the commitment to reopening schools in the 21-22 school year. My daughter is in virtual kindergarten this year, and it has proven to be more harm than good despite the teachers' best efforts. And with my son starting next year in kindergarten, I can't commit to a district that can't be in person. So if we can't get this this train back on the tracks, we're going to need to find another school district. So thanks. Hope we can come to some sort of reasonable accommodation. Bye.
Good afternoon. This is Bridget Hines, and I'm calling with 2 comments on the proposed school committee statement about school reopening in the fall. First, I prefer language that says no later than fall 2021, as I believe for purposes related to learning loss and student well-being, we should look into having students in the building as soon as feasible this spring and summer. Secondly, I'm confused by the inclusion of vaccines being linked to reopening. This isn't on the CDC's lengthy list of criteria, and I'm not sure why we would hold a higher standard than health professionals are currently recommending. With that said, I would love to see the district and superintendent use any levers they have to work collaboratively with the town and UMass to get our teachers vaccinated as soon as their part of phase 2 opens, as I think that would lead to us being able to open schools more quickly. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matt Lackner. I live in Amherst. I have a daughter who is a first grader at Fort River. Even though I think it's completely insane that schools are not open now, that's a different discussion. So my comment tonight is just to say that I believe the school committee needs to very strongly confirm that schools will be open for all students in the fall. Under no circumstances should schools not open in the fall. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
My name is Ina Prokopovich. I'm a resident of Amherst. I have a second grader at Wildwood currently and a preschooler who we hope will start kindergarten there this fall. I'm calling to say that I hope that the school committee can commit to providing in-person learning for the 2021-22 school year. Our children have not entered a classroom for almost an entire year already, while children in neighboring communities have been back already for several months and have been in person safely. It is heartbreaking that so many families in the district are considering leaving the district, and making a commitment like this at this time would help a lot in alleviating concerns about next year. Thank you.
Carlo Della Piccola, Amherst. I would like to express my support for the school committee's statement of
Sorry, that was cut off. That was not me.
Hi, my name is Rob Moore of Amherst. I have 3 kids in Crocker Farm. My comment is a respectful demand that the school committee commit to reopening at least the elementary schools in fall 2021. There are many reasons for this. The science is clear from an epidemiological perspective that there are safe ways to do so right now, and with vaccinations gradually reducing the impact of COVID, fall will presumably be that much safer. The science is also clear that kids, particularly the less advantaged and the young, are suffering tremendously from the lack of in-person learning. Finally, the science is clear that requiring parents to serve as their kids' proctors every day has set women back in the workforce by decades. We need to do something about this trend, or I'm afraid we're going to slide back to the workplace inequities that we spent so long trying to correct. And just to be clear here, anything less than a full-throated, unequivocal commitment to in-person learning next school year is unacceptable. Anything less will result in us, and from what I hear, many other families exploring options for leaving the district. This will cut funding for the school system and thereby the positions that the teachers union is fighting for. And one more point. We appreciate the position the school committee is in, your thoughtful approach here. Your heart's obviously in the right place. You put a lot of care into this job. However, and I do mean this, we will never again support any member of the committee that fails to commit to return to in-person learning for elementary at least. So we urge you to do so. Please commit to returning to in-person learning next year. Thank you.
Hi all, this is Nina Mankin from Amherst. I have a third grader in Wildwood, and thank you for your continued hard work. And I'm calling in support of a resolution with teeth to convince us all that we can count on having in-person school in the fall, barring any shift in health advice from health professionals. So that is why I'm calling. We are also a family that will consider, I just don't want to lose so many great families from the district because they are doing what they need to do for their kids and finding other ways to get in-person education. So once again, thank you and everything you can do, and hang in there, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Peter Everett. I am a resident of Amherst. I have a daughter in the elementary school system, and I am a local pediatrician. I have comments tonight on two related issues. First, I fully support the committee's plan to change the start times of the schools for the coming year. The evidence is clear that later start times for high school students make a big impact on both their health and their safety. So I applaud leadership's ability to take the best available evidence and create a plan that supports our children's health while also addressing the practical barriers to the plan. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. And in this vein, I strongly urge the school committee to continue every effort to return our children to in-person schooling, particularly those that are most vulnerable and most affected by remote learning. The AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, continues to strongly advocate that all policy considerations for school COVID-19 plans should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. The president of the AAP, Lee Savio-Beers, has said that the healthy development and well-being of children is dependent on in-school learning, and that safety in schools and in the community therefore must be a priority. So I fully support the ongoing efforts of the committee to get children back to in-person learning. I urge the committee to continue to advocate to the state for vaccinations for our teachers, for funding to support COVID testing in our schools, and for funding for ongoing improvements to keep the school environment as safe as possible for our teachers and students. To this end, I support the committee's proposed statement that given the availability of vaccines for our staff and given the fulfillment of the health department safety guidelines, that in-person learning be made available to students in Amherst. Thank you for your time and for your leadership.
Are folks able to see the screen? Thank you. Great. Okay. As mentioned, the that document of the email comment is available on the Regional School Committee Agendas webpage. And I also neglected to note at the beginning of this meeting that we are being live streamed and recorded. Thank you to Amherst Media for their continued support in that effort in making this available. Our next item is approving minutes. And we have in our packet the minutes from our January 5th meeting of the Regional School Committee, Amherst and Pelham School Committee. Mr. Demling.
Just a couple of edits on item 17, which is page 7 of our packet, on the MSBA enrollment update. Mr. Demling explained that the reasons why we engaged in this project was to address reconfigurations of size for both schools. I recall that my general point was we engaged in it to address both schools. So just striking reconfiguration of size for both, striking those words. The other sentence is fine. And then the second change is on the next page, page 8 of our packet at the very top. Mr. Demling said that we need to bump up the 6th grade to the middle school conversation off of our priority list. What I said was that we should bump it up the priority list. So just Mr. Demling said that we need to bump up the 6th grade to the middle school conversation up, not off the priority list. That's it.
On that same item, item 17 on the previous page at the bottom, it says Mr. Harrington asked which school would need the most work. I believe what he, and I'll look to Mr. Harrington for confirmation, but I believe what he was saying was that we didn't want to forget that another school, another elementary school would continue to need attention and not to lose sight of that. Is that correct, Mr. Harrington? Yeah. I'm going to go back to page 1 of this. We listed on the attendance, it listed Bethany Seeger as being a member of the Pelham School Committee, or Bethany, Ms. Seeger is listed twice, and I believe that should be Brenda Barlow. In that same page under public comment, it said regardless of method, in the middle of that paragraph, the comments need to be submitted by 3 p.m. on Wednesday, September 2nd. I think it should just need to be submitted by 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting. On item 10, superintendent's update, Dr. Morris updated on, it says Cominantes numbers, but I believe it was the Distance Learning Center numbers. And that's all that I had. Are there any other edits that folks noticed? Seeing none, I believe each committee needs to vote to approve these minutes. So we'll start with the Amherst School Committee. I'll move that the Amherst School Committee approve the minutes of January 5th. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Spitzer. Well, roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
And McDonald, aye. I will likewise move that the Regional School Committee approve the minutes as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Again, moved by McDonald and seconded by Spitzer, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Seeger?
Seeger, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. And I'll turn it over to Chair Hall.
All right, I'll move that Pelham approve the January 5th minutes as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Hall, seconded by Stancer, and I'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Barlow?
Barlow, aye.
Mr. Menino?
Menino, aye.
And Hall, aye.
Great, thank you. And now moving along, we'll move to superintendent's update. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Morris.
Thank you. Couple quick ones tonight. So just want to acknowledge it's African American or Black History Month at the high school. Many of the students in POCU, which is People of Color United, have done a great job researching, putting together information about perhaps lesser known African American historical figures. They've been working on that in A period to read excerpts that they've worked really hard on, and just thanks to the students and the staff members for doing that. Additionally, I was able to attend last week Summit Academy's Black History Month celebration. Worth noting, it was the facilitator was a student at Summit Academy, and the adults were there, but it was really student-led, and there were student performances, student readings, slideshows, a lot of work that went into it. So kudos again to the students as well as the faculty. And it was nice because the facilitators student I knew from when that student was at Crocker Farm many years ago, was a much younger student. So it's really nice to see the growth and have these moments. We're able to see the maturity in really neat ways. A number of other schools, including Pelham, had African-American read-in days with a number of different readers coming in. And so thanks to all the schools for their celebration of this important month. An Amherst update that there was last Thursday, the MSBA Board of Directors voted that our project was unanimously approved to move into the feasibility stage. And that's a great next step in improving the learning conditions for students and working conditions for our staff. We'll be looking at two options. We're approved to look at two options. One is a 320-person K through 6 elementary school that would replace Fort River. The other is a 575 K through 5 elementary school that would potentially replace both Fort River and Wildwood School. It was on WWLP tonight. Nice job by Hector Molina. It was a good informative piece. And he asked me, am I favoring one, or is this, and I said, no, the whole point of feasibility is you dig in, you see what each would look like, what the cost would be for each option, and then you bring it to the community and gather where the community will is. So we're going to study both of those in earnest. The next step is hiring an owner project manager, which there's a design team. I want to thank Dwayne Chamble, who's going to be the schools rep on that group, and then hiring a designer. If we stay on schedule, an ambitious schedule, it means that we'll be hiring the owner project manager in June. That's how long it takes to post the request for qualification proposals, get those in, interview them, and you have to go to MSBA for the final step on that. And for the designer, I think the earliest would be, again, early fall. So it feels like to the public that not a lot of work may be going on, but the building committee is really ramping up because these people will be with us the whole time. So it really matters that we get the right people to work with us. Mr. Harrington, school committee rep, anything I'm missing on that one? Sorry to pull you into superintendent update, but just figured if there's anything you wanted to share.
Nope, that was pretty much, that's how I understood it.
Okay. Perfect. And the next meeting, for anyone who's interested, is tomorrow morning at 8:30 in the morning of the building committee, where we're really going to be talking a lot about the owner project manager selection process. Thank you to Dean's Beans. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I should probably become one. They've given us yet another $2,000 grant to support our work around food scarcity. This was not something we applied for. It's something that I got a very pleasant email in the last, I think it was yesterday this morning, that they saw the work that was happening in some local districts like ours that are really going out into the community to make sure people have the food they need in this very difficult time. So thank you to Dean's Beans for that unexpected surprise. Thanks to our food service staff too. For those of you who didn't get the message, tomorrow is going to be the food pickup for the week. It was supposed to be today, but given the weather and the uncertainty of the weather, we pushed it to tomorrow. But thanks for all that work. And that is, I believe, all the updates I had for tonight.
Great. Moving on to, we have chair's update, and we have a full schedule. So I'm going to.
Ms. McDonald, I'm sorry, there was a hand up, not to interrupt you, but.
Sorry, questions, Mr. Demling.
Yeah, just real quick, Dr. Morris, on the Fort River principal future, if you could just comment on what you're thinking about for general timeline for that process. And the community's probably interested in that.
Yep. So I think it was shared earlier electronically. Both Ms. Chamberlain, she's going off for an amazing adventure, being on the other side of the world. And Dr. Greenfield is moving out east to head a really renowned school specific for students with disabilities. And so we, last week, I want to say, Ms. Cunningham sent a survey out to all Fort River families and staff, trying to get the understanding what the attributes are, as well as a call for volunteers to be on either a screening committee or an interview committee. So once we gather the feedback from that survey, we'll create a job posting, post that either later this month or more likely early next month, which would be the kind of prime time for that those searches to be advertised. And we should have a new person in, in terms of the end of the process by June 1st to ensure a smooth transition. I thank Ms. Chamberlain and Dr. Greenfield, because I know they're already organizing files and making sure that they're doing the work to promote a smooth transition to new leadership in the building. We already received a number of inquiries because of the newspaper article and reporting about Diane's departure. So we're getting really good feedback from the community of what they're looking for in the next leader at Fort River. So that's where we are. Thanks. Should have mentioned that earlier.
Any other questions? I'm now seeing none, so I apologize for that. And as I mentioned, I don't have a chair's update this evening. I'm going to look to see if Ms. Hall, if you have any update for Pelham.
Nope, thank you.
Okay. And so we'll move on to school committee announcements. Are there announcements from any of our subcommittees? Ms. Spitzer.
I just wanted to inform the Amherst committee, in particular, the JCPC meetings have commenced, and we'll be meeting from, and by we, I mean Peter Demling and I will be meeting 7 to 9 on Thursday nights for, I think it's at least 6 additional weeks or about that. There are at least 2 nights where Amherst schools are going to be on the agenda, and I can share those dates with the school committee, and they should be publicly posted also on the Amherst Town website for any listeners who would like to watch. They will be recorded and live streamed, I believe.
So I saw some heads shaking. I don't know if there's any updates from, so I take that to mean there's no update from SCTF. Is there from budget or JLMSC? No. Okay. Great. So we'll move on to new and continuing business. And I would like to propose, because one of our regional members has a conflict later this evening, and so was wondering if I'd like to propose that we swap the order of our first 2 items of business under new and continuing business, and instead start with the fall 2021-22 return, and then after that move on to the spring 21 volunteer return update. Are the committees okay with that swap? Seeing some thumbs up and nodding heads, great. So on that, I will share. I don't think I need to update folks because a lot of our public comment was on this draft motion, but I will share it on screen again. Oops. Are folks seeing the draft motion? It's hard for it. Google doesn't tell me what's showing. So as a reminder, this is the motion that the regional school committee reviewed a week ago. I believe the Pelham School Committee looked at it also on Thursday. The Amherst School Committee hasn't seen it yet. Since we looked at this last week, I did discuss this and check in with our legal counsel because there's been some questions, as you heard also in the public comment, questions about is this negotiable? How can we make this commitment given collaboration and negotiation with some of our unions? And the advice that I received from our counsel is that the decision on a remote versus hybrid versus in-person education model is a core education decision. And what that means is that it cannot be bargained over or negotiated over. And it cannot be included in the bargaining if it is. I think said another way, this decision on whether it's full-time or remote or some hybrid in between is not something that is up for negotiation with any union. So I wanted to share that because I think that's important. That was some of the conversation that we've had a week ago, and obviously it's a question that's coming up from members in the community. So I wanted to share that before we kick off our conversation. And I wanted to look to Mr. Demling to see if you had anything that you wanted to add.
Yeah, just briefly, I'll try to keep my remarks brief for the moment. So I guess I would suggest to the committee to consider removing that first section that refers to the vaccine, so that the modified version would be provided that the safety guidelines of local public health officials. We heard some of this in the comment. I mean, by the way, thank you for everybody who sent the public comment in on this and other things. Either way, this is why we have things one week and vote the next is to elicit that. And the reasons why I think it would be better not to have that in there are a little different than some of the public comment. I got a lot of direct emails and messages about concern that we were going to require staff to be vaccinated, that we were going to force staff to be vaccinated, or that in-person would be contingent on all staff being vaccinated. So there was just confusion, right, about the intention of the language. And since this statement is as much a clear communication to the public about our intentions for the fall as it is an instruction to the superintendent, I think removing it would be better. It also doesn't really have any material effect given what we currently know about the schedule for vaccine availability for staff. So, hopefully, based on what the state currently says, staff, educators should have the vaccine available to take next month, if not sooner. So certainly not much later than that, and definitely before this September, right? So we don't really need that conditional. And then just in general, and you heard a little bit of this in the public comment, it's a little bit out of step with the spirit of the rest of the motion, which is we are making a firm commitment as a committee to let the science and the health experts assess the conditions and not attempt to codify things in documents or whatnot. I kind of think of it as we should follow the science but not dictate the terms, right? And so that's why there's nothing in here about ACH and masks and distancing and all that. All these things that we worked really hard on to try and define last August, and then what we experienced is that the situation evolves, right? The virus evolves, the science evolves, the evidence evolves, and we don't want to be pinpointing a decision and try and snapshot what that is. But we can commit to letting this be at the direction of public health officials. The other thing I guess I would just update or make clear. We talked about why now. If we're so far out from the fall, what's the rush? And we talked about the budgetary impact of students leaving, and so I didn't know this, but apparently PVPA recently opened for in-person. That's one of the charter schools in our area, and the other charter school, PVCICS, is planning to start in person soon, and they're both will be starting their main recruitment season right now. So it's that is one of the big time urgencies of this, and I think it just generally makes it clear that the school committee is not going to be defining in an MOA or any other document a metric or a set of metric that just automatically closes and opens things. And so what can we commit to right now? Can we commit to no matter what that we will have in person on day one for everyone? I mean, we got this request from some emails, right? And no, we can't make that commitment. It always has to be conditional on the health conditions and the health guidelines of the guidelines from public health officials, which is what this is, right? We're making a commitment that based on that assessment, not knowing what things are going to be like 6 months from now, but based on their assessment, we will follow the science and we are committed to this full in person. So I'll just pause there.
Mr. Menino.
I agree with Peter's comments. Could you restate the wording then? What is the revised wording?
Yeah, it's just removing the section that Ms. McDonald could probably highlight with her expertise there.
Is it? Are you seeing that highlight? Okay. Actually, and the word "and." So that highlighted portion would be removed. So it would read, provided the safety guidelines of local public health officials are fully adhered to, the Amherst Regional Public Schools will provide full-time in-person learning for the full 2021-22 school year for all students. The superintendent will manage this plan and any shift back to remote learning based on a continuous assessment of health conditions in direct consultation with local public health officials.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I see a couple hands up. Mr. Sullivan, I believe you were next.
Hi, I'm the Shutesbury representative to the Regional School Committee. I am not a member of Union 26. I am not a member of Pelham. I am not a member of the Amherst School Committee. So my focus, even though we're all bound together because of the APEA, is with the regional schools. And ever since Dr. Morris mentioned the cutting of the dance program at the middle school, my focus has suddenly been on the middle school. And my concern really is that I have 7th graders in Shutesbury that didn't even get to take the field trip to the middle school last year as 6th graders. They have never stepped into that building. And if we don't start school in the fall, they're going to make this jump from 6th grade to 9th grade, never having stepped and experienced middle school. And I can't even imagine the physical and psychological growth that these kids are having and not being able to step into that pool that is the middle school. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Spitzer.
Thank you. I don't think we've made the motion, so I don't think I need to make a formal amendment, but I would like to add a sentence that I think might, I'd just like to share it with the committee. I'll put it in the chat, and then I'll also read it out loud. But I want to say that I like this motion. I think it's important that we signal to the community that we will be open for in-person learning. I think it's essential that we don't agree to metrics in the future. I think that, if I could change one thing about our planning last year, I'd go back and rethink that. But anyways, I did hear loud and clear that folks are feeling like they haven't been included in the planning process and the conversation. So I just want to suggest that maybe we add a sentence such as the superintendent will collaborate with and gather input from faculty and staff leadership, the school committees and student families to inform this plan. Sorry, it's missing a word. I would just like to add that because I think I had no doubt that this would be part of it, but at least here we're stating explicitly that we would be doing outreach and working with all of those who would be affected by this plan, and maybe just stating it as part of this motion would help to allay some fears that we would be moving forward without taking in all of that feedback that I think is vital. And I do agree, like, we're not going to just, move forward without engaging with folks the way we did over the summer this year. I think it's just that we've learned a lot, and I think we've learned how much in-person matters, and the absence of it is really harming our community right now in a lot of ways. I also heard loudly that some people are saying that we need to think about hybrid options and remote option, and I've heard clearly that in the current budget environment that would be really difficult for us to pull off when we're facing budget cuts across all of our districts. So I guess I would just urge those who feel strongly that we have a full menu of options available to the community is that they maybe also advocate at the federal, state, and also local level for making sure that our schools have the money we need to implement what I think is going to be a really, really important movement back to in-person, but it's not going to be without without cost. And right now we're looking at doing it with less money, less dollars than we have this year. So thank you.
Other comments or questions, including on the proposed amendment? Ms. Dancer. Oh, Dr. Morris, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a process comment, which is we now have quasi-proposed amendments on a motion that hasn't been made. I just wonder if someone wants to make the motion and do the process part and then open up discussion. Sorry to jump in, but I just feel like we're going to get into a place where we're sort of discussing a proposed amendment without actually having the amendment formally proposed. So just process-wise, if someone's able to move, I think then the rest of the conversation can flow a little better.
Yeah. Mr. Emlin?
So if you want to, just process-wise, if you want to add that proposed amendment in, and then I can make the motion, and then, because then we have everything up on the screen at the same time, right? All the words that we're considering.
I'm going to try to do this as you speak.
Oh, right, because it's PDF. So while you're doing that, I'll just say that as long as our understanding of inform this plan is the same, and I think it is, that I think this is a fine amendment. It's certainly my assumption, and it would be my expectation, and I would be holding the superintendent accountable to this, that the school committee is clearly empowered with the legal authority to set the goals, right? We say what's going to happen. It's then up to the superintendent to implement that plan. And as part of implementing that plan, there is a robust engagement and collaboration process with all of our stakeholders. And a number of key stakeholders named here, faculty, staff, leadership, school committee, student families, informing that. Because the rubber hits the road in all the details. The only core thing we're saying is that in-person will be available for all students for the whole year, full-time, dependent on the health conditions, and that the switch back would be managed by the superintendent. But within that, there's a whole lot of details to call out. And so I think it's, since this is a public communications document, as much as it is a instruction to the superintendent, I think that seems appropriate.
Does that reflect what folks are? Ms. Spitzer, would you like to make a motion? Oh, sorry.
So I move that are all three committees going to be making this motion, or are we doing it at the regional level?
All three committees will need to make the motion, and I think it would be appropriate to start with the region.
Okay, great. So I move that the Amherst-Pelham Regional School Committee adopt the following motion: provided the safety guidelines of local public health officials are fully adhered to, the Amherst Regional Public Schools will provide full-time in-person learning for the full 2021 to 2022 school year for all students. The superintendent will manage this plan and any shift back to remote learning based on a continuous assessment of health conditions in direct consultation with local public health officials. The superintendent will collaborate with and gather input from faculty and staff leadership, the school committees, or the school committee in this case, and student families to inform this plan.
Second.
Moved by Spitzer and seconded by Stancer. Any further discussion? Dr. Morris.
On the end of the sentence that got added, can you help me with student families? I don't know if that's referring specifically to students' families or the families of students. All of which are fine. I'm just trying to understand from a clarity perspective.
Ms. Spitzer?
I think, I borrowed this from an earlier motion we passed. So I believe it would be the families of students. But I would be happy to also, yeah. Perhaps we should include students. But I think that students are part of families, so hopefully they'd be included.
I mean, if it's okay, I think it's reasonable to include students in this as well. We'll be talking about another engagement we just did where, I think their voice is important. And I think if we can call it out, it's obviously going to be developmentally appropriate. We're not going to ask kindergartners, same thing we might ask 11th graders, but we would probably learn a lot by asking our students their thoughts and what their needs are returning to school. So that'd be my instinct.
Mr. Demling.
I move to amend the proposed motion to end with the school committees, students, and families to inform this plan.
Second.
Mr. Demling, and then Ms. Lord.
So just parliamentary 101. We have a motion on the table, and now we have a motion to amend the motion. And so the first vote, so we'll discuss right now we're discussing the amendment, which is that little word change at the end. And then we'll have to vote on that. So we're still at the region level. If we vote that amendment, then we're back on the main motion. Is there further discussion? And then we go to the other motion. Just because we don't do a lot of this, I thought I would pause there.
Ms. Lord, you had your hand up.
So following Mr. Demling's parliamentary rules, I think we wouldn't bring up my thing if it is an amendment because we have to pass the other amendment first.
Yep, correct. So this discussion is about the addition of, clarification and separation of students and families to the original motion. If there's no further discussion, then we can vote on that amendment. I'm not seeing any. So this is a region vote on the amendment to add students to that last sentence. We'll move to a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington abstain.
Ms. Kenny?
I'm sorry. So we're just voting about adding students to the last line right now?
Yes.
I think I'm going to abstain.
Ms. Lord?
Lord abstain.
Ms. Seeger?
Seeger abstain.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
No.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes 4-1 with 4 abstentions. Dr. Morris?
I'm sorry. So I'm not a Robert's Rules person, but I don't think a majority of people voted for the amendment who voted. So I don't believe that amendment would pass. I could be wrong, but I think if there's 9 people who voted and only 4 voted for it, then it would default to the original language that was there.
So 5 people voted.
I thought, maybe I misheard you. I thought you said 4 voted in favor, 4 voted against, or 4 abstained and 1 voted against.
Correct. So abstains don't count as
oh. I'd have to, so someone who knows Robert's Rules better.
Robert's Rules aficionado expert. Yes, Mr. Demling?
Okay, Robert's Rules has a lot of exceptions, so I'm not going to say off the top of my head that I can cover all of them. But the general rule, as I understand it, is abstentions count as, it's like saying you're here for the purpose of quorum. They don't count positively or negatively on the vote. So my understanding is that the motion passes, and so there are some very specific laws and decisions that you make on different boards, including school committees, where they say specifically, no, in this case, you need a majority of members present. But regular vanilla stuff like making amendments to motion language doesn't count in there. So my understanding is the motion passes. But I'm happy to be corrected.
Yeah, no, I just did a little Robert's Rules lookup, and I believe you're correct that they don't count towards the final tally. So it's as if 5 people voted and 4 voted in favor and 1 against. So my apologies for the last 2 minutes.
No, that was helpful. It's good to get that clarification. So thank you for asking the question, actually. So the motion passes. And we are now looking at and considering this amended motion with the inclusion of students and families. So Ms. Lord, did you want to comment on the overall motion?
I do. I'm sorry. I tend to be a little slower in my processing. So by the time I realize I have a question, we're in the middle of the vote. But I was just curious whether it was implied that the unions are in the faculty and staff leadership, or I'm hoping that we're still collaborating and being collaborative in this with our union. I don't know. I'm just concerned that I don't want to seem like we're circumventing the unions and that we'll all be at the same place in September because herd immunity, yay. But I just don't know if it's implied in faculty, staff leadership, or if it's something we want to think about adding just for collaborating with on behalf of the superintendent.
I think I don't have an answer, necessarily direct answer on that, but I think the intent here is the middle part of this motion is that we will provide full-time in-person learning. And based on the legal advice that I received on the motion previously, not before it was amended, was that this is a core education decision, meaning it isn't up for bargaining and we can't bargain it away even if we choose to. So that portion of that core piece of this motion and this statement is not open for bargaining. What this last paragraph, and at least as I interpret it, is saying is that in order to implement this plan, the superintendent is going to collaborate with all of the school community as listed here to develop the implementation of that plan. That's how I understand that. So I would say, yes, that is inclusive of any organization of the faculty and staff. Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with that staff leadership includes union leadership when we're talking about who we instruct the superintendent to collaborate with. But we can just ask him. I mean, Dr. Morris, I mean, even if this section wasn't there, my expectation would have been that you would be collaborating with APA leadership, AFSCME leadership, all of our union leadership, as well as our other staff leadership. It's explicitly, stated here, which I like and support. But is that your understanding?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that would be the plan for all the leadership groups, and that's it. Making no commentary on what the wording should be, but yeah, that was, I had that clear messaging. I understood the language to be inclusive of that.
Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, I just wanted to state for the record that so I got advice from the Ethics Commission earlier today, and the advice I got kind of changes with the amendment. So I just wanted to say that for the record, that's kind of where I'm at with this discussion. So
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, is your hand up? Did you have a comment? No, okay. Any further discussion or comment on this? Ms. Hall.
I support this as currently drafted. I think it's just really important. It's not at all too early to be talking about next year. And I think it's really important to signal to the community that this is our priority. So I don't have amendments. I like it as it is.
Yeah, I don't want to restate things that great things that all of you have said, but I would add also on the timing. I think, you know, one of the we have the luxury, a little bit of a luxury of time to plan for the fall, and I see that as important, not just for signaling for the families that are trying to decide what to do for their children in the coming year, but also so that we do have the time to very thoughtfully and thoroughly plan and get all the input and put the plans in place, given our restricted budgets, so that we're not rushing through it like we had to do in a year ago, right? So at this time last year, we were just facing pandemic and trying to figure out what we were going to do for the remainder of last school year. And it wasn't until June that we started planning. And I think we all felt along the way that we didn't have enough time. And so, you know, proper collaboration and input gathering in implementing a plan, in my mind, requires us to take time to do that. And so I think by making this commitment now, we enable the superintendent and the district leadership to spend that time to put together a thoughtful plan that meets the needs of our school community as well as our significant budget constraints. So I'm in favor of making this statement and this commitment today. Ms. Dancer.
Thank you. I would like to say that I also support this. I'm glad that we've taken out the vaccine piece. I would just like to say that I think that the district has done a lot of work to make things as safe as possible. We have applied for and been accepted into 2 different testing programs for the schools. All of the work that was done for the ventilation in the schools has been exceptional. And also, I think with this last paragraph, talking about the shift back to remote learning, if we can't know today what things are going to be like in September. We can say our intent is that we really want our children back in school. And as the representative from Pelham, I can tell you that it's crucial for the continuation of the school itself. We need to have our students back. I believe the students will be safe when they come back. But if something happens between now and then that will affect the health of people, that is provided for in this last paragraph. So I very strongly support this.
Any further discussion before we move to a vote for the region? I'm seeing none, so we will move to a roll call vote of the Regional School Committee. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, abstain.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Seeger?
Seeger, abstain.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes 7-0 with 2 abstentions. Would anybody from the Pelham School Committee like to make a motion? I'll turn that over to Chair Hall.
All right, I move that the Pelham School Committee adopt this motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Hall, seconded by Menino. And any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Menino.
Menino, aye.
Ms. Barlow.
Barlow, aye.
Ms. Stancer.
Stancer, aye.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny, aye.
And Hall, aye.
And I will make a motion for the Amherst School Committee to approve the motion as presented on screen. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Spitzer. Any further discussion? Mr. Demling?
This is probably assumed, but obviously the name of the district is specific to the motion we're passing, right? So.
Right. So provided the safety guidelines of local public health officials are fully adhered to, the Amherst Public Schools will provide full-time in-person learning for full 2021-22 school year for all students. Dr. Morris?
Yeah, on that point, I thought about it and then I stayed quiet because the Amherst Regional Public Schools, or ARPS, is generally our acronym for all 3 districts. If we're talking about the region, it'd be the Amherst-Pelham Regional Schools, which is the official name for our 7th through 12th regional schools. So, I mean, I didn't write this, but I do think the current wording, mostly covers it. You can certainly adjust it if you will, but Amherst Regional Public Schools is a mythic whole thing, right? It's really the acronym we use for the 3 districts that share a central office more than it is for the actual region. So whatever you want to do, it's fine, but that's sort of how we function. But you never see that actual wording on any official state DESE document. It's sort of the acronym that is used for the 3 districts.
Colloquial name. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll move to a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington abstain.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes 4-0 with 1 abstention. And let me find my screen. So, great. Thank you all. So we'll move on now to item A, which is our spring 2021 volunteer return update. And there's a presentation in our packet, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Morris to walk us through the update.
Sure. And I'm going to present the screen. It's going to look almost identical, but there are a couple people who did change their mind one way or the other, since that was in the packet, put in the packet on Friday. So the numbers are going to be almost identical, but not exactly identical to what's in the screen. So what I think I'd like to do is go over the school by school numbers, give a little context to them, and talk about what we're potentially able to do and bring forward moving forward. So I'd like to start, I'll start with the elementary level, if that's okay. So at Crocker Farm, you can see the numbers there. A significant number of the staff who volunteered to return in person are preschool staff, not all, but a significant number. And so what we believe we're able to do is to bring preschool in to start on March 1st, but also for primary grade classrooms. And we're able to start on March 1st. We feel comfortable with it, in fact, because all the staff members who will be coming in, at least the teachers and preschool staff, have already been in. They were in October, and so we want to reorient them. It's been a while, but that's what we believe we're able to do. So preschool and then 4 primary grade classrooms. We also are planning on March 15th, so 2 weeks later, to bring an intermediate grade classroom in of a staff member who is interested in returning to in-person. So by mid-March, we expect to have 5 K-6 classrooms in the school, and the preschool, and that program is being developed with staff and a lot of input. Partial day program, as it typically is, it will be adjusted for COVID times, but that's where we are with Crocker Farm. What I thought I would do is maybe go through the Amherst elementary schools first, take questions, and then do Pelham, take questions, and then the region, if that's okay.
That sounds good. Can you state what classrooms you said for Crocker Farm?
So at Crocker Farm, and I'm intentionally being slightly vague just to protect confidentiality, but what we should have preschool, we should have 4 classrooms of primary grades, and then 1 intermediate grade level, and we'll be following up again with, more specifics for students in those classes and all that. But in a public meeting, I'm trying to strike the right balance between sharing with the community where we are, but also protecting confidentiality of staff members. Before I go on, it does look like there's a question.
Mr. Demling?
So this probably applies to all the slides, but when should parents expect to hear about, I presume that a survey or outreach to the students that are able to be serviced in person will go out?
Yeah, by the end of the week. I wanted to make sure everyone here is comfortable with what we're planning before doing that next layer of outreach. Yeah. So we plan to meet Thursday to close a loop on a couple of things, and then follow up with more specific outreach on Friday to families. For Fort River, you could see that the numbers were a bit lower. Unfortunately, at Fort River, we don't have sufficient staff to open the building. And we do have some staff who work in specialized programs and that were typically at Fort River. And it's a meeting today actually about wanting to make sure we try to get those students into a building. It doesn't make sense it's a small number of students, high impact on those students, but it doesn't make sense to open the building for such a small cohort because that involves a nurse, a CNA, all the pieces. So we are looking for which of the other 2 elementary schools would be the better fit, and we should have that decision by Friday as well. I think there's a strong interest in one of the 2 other schools. But at Fort River right now, we don't have sufficient staff to open the building. We do believe we can bring some specialized program students back in and looking at one of the other 2 sites, which will be open. Probably we're looking about mid-March to work on all the details for that specific population of students. And particularly being in a different site, we want to really make sure that the site is ready and that the students and families and staff have an opportunity to feel ready to be in a different site. At Wildwood, we do have sufficient staff, we believe, to open the building. Much like the Fort River Specialized Program, we're looking at a mid-March open. We believe we will, Ms. Seeger has to go, so thank you, Ms. Seeger. Have a good night. We're looking at, we think by mid to late March, we believe we'll have 5 classrooms. Interestingly, not spread across the K-6 continuum, but we believe we'll have 5 classrooms open, and we believe we'll have the staff to support that. So again, we're still working on more details. That's not a population who has been in the school at any point this year for the most part. So we want to take a little bit of extra time to make sure staff have what they need, and then go over safety protocols with students and families in a way that they never had it the first time. Everyone will benefit from having it again, but it's different having it the first time versus the second time. So again, by mid-March, we feel like we'll have 5 classrooms up and running at Wildwood. So that's the end of my first district. So I'll pause and see if there's comments or questions. Actually, I'm going to say one other thing, and it's an awkward one, but I want to just name it. So what feels uncomfortable, one of the reasons I wanted to wait till after tonight to engage my team and take the next steps is it feels awkward to open 2 of 3 schools. It feels awkward to open certain grade levels. And I think there's legitimately an equity argument that I imagine people will have about fairness, about who, perhaps gets to be in person. I think, for our team, we talked about that at length, and we understand that opinion. For us, if we have staff and students who want to be in person, it seems like better to have people who want to be in person than to not allow that from a perspective of, well, it depends on which school you're at or what grade level or what teacher you're at. So all of this is imperfect, but we didn't want to, make perfection the enemy of the progress. And so for us, we feel comfortable moving forward, even though it is, we'll be really clear, it's not particularly equitable to say that 2 of our schools will open and 1 won't open, but that didn't seem like a great reason to not allow 2 of the schools that have staff and students who want to be there to not open. So, I just want to name that tension. On our team, our feeling is that tension exists, and the better outcome for us is getting students and staff who want to be in person. But I just wanted to name it, and again, bring it to this public meeting and to the committee as a real issue that we wrestled with, and at least where we landed, and just want to make sure that the committee feels comfortable is not the right word, but supportive of moving forward, with a model that's uneven across grade levels and across schools within the district.
Questions so far? Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to take another opportunity. I don't feel like we can say this enough, and you might get tired of me saying that I don't feel like we can say this enough, but I greatly appreciate every teacher that participated in the survey, and I appreciate every response. I mean, obviously, we're trying to we're doing this in order to maximize in-person learning to meet the needs of students. But I'm as grateful for the teachers who felt like they wanted to continue remote or felt like they didn't want to answer the survey, as I am for the teachers that are wanting to teach in person. This is a process that we collaborated with the APA leadership very closely. The district did in terms of the survey design and the FAQ and the outreach to staff. We've been very clear from the outset that this effort was 100% volunteer, and we should not be placing pressure on teachers. And so I just want to restate that again. In terms of the inequity, I appreciate you naming it because I don't think we should shy away from what I think when we act or decide not to act on something in the school committee, we should do it very transparently, eyes wide open, and then be decisive about it. And that means acknowledging all aspects. And it is hard. It is hard to see the unevenness across the buildings. And that is an inequity that it's an accident of your zip code your street of where you are in Amherst as to whether you may have that opportunity. And it is hard. I am supportive of the plan as you've proposed. Mostly because I feel like we need to provide in person wherever it's possible, even if that means that we can't provide it across the board. And I just compare it to what we're currently doing, right? What we're currently doing is a system, the remote learning for nearly everybody, where we know is massively inequitable, right? Even if we just talk about students with special needs, we know that there are students who can't access remote learning at all, and many other students who have only limited access. And we've been on this model since the beginning of the year, and we know it. We know it's very inequitable, and that's the model we go because that's what we're able to achieve, And so it is obviously not the ideal, but I think it's a step forward, and as things progress. Hopefully, as some of the concerns that you outlined in the staff survey in terms of the vaccine availability and the weather and whatnot are alleviated as time goes on, we'll see maybe a different situation. But I think for right now, this is appropriate to move forward with.
Other questions? Ms. Spitzer, and then Mr. Harrington.
I just had a couple questions. One was, the way I'm hearing it is that there's going to be a movement of the pre-K students in before the upper grades, but that otherwise we're not doing a phased-in approach as we had initially envisioned when it was going to be where it was going to be the original model where it was tied to the metrics in the original plan that we had. And then my second question was, darn it, I think I'm.
Well, I can answer your first one. Maybe that'll give you some stuff out. So in some ways it is a phase-in model. So the March 1st, who's coming in are preschool and then primary grade classrooms that we're already in. And then 2 weeks later, it'd be the intermediate and upper grade level. So it is sort of a phased-in model. It's not the same as what was in the original planning document. We're talking about a pretty small number of classrooms and a relatively small number of students. But we did want to phase in people who had already been in first, and that gives a little more time and thought and planning for folks who are coming in for the first time 2 weeks later, or 2 or 3 weeks later. So there is some phasing built into that at the elementary level, and I framed it a little differently, but I think the way you asked it helped clarify. So thank you.
And I remembered my second question, if it's okay. And as many of us read about in Mr. Harrington's recent article about how we've had a lot of staff in the buildings throughout the entire pandemic. And I'm assuming, I just want to clarify for us and also for anybody who's tuning in tonight or following however they are, that it's not that we're only going to have 16 people in the building, that this doesn't actually count. And by staff, I mean, teachers and staff. We're also going to have all the facilities folks. I'm assuming administrative staff will hopefully be in person supporting. Because if you look at these numbers, I know we're not going to be filling the schools completely, but I just want to emphasize that there will be people supporting the people we're reporting on here.
Yeah, and that's inclusive of mental health professionals, right? I'm just, I know I'm intentionally being vague, just to protect the anonymity of responses, but I wish I could put up more specific details, and I think, but absolutely in terms of administration, mental health staff, paraeducators, educators, office staff, custodial staff, absolutely. But just because this is a public meeting, I'm being a little coded in my language because I think it's in the best interest of our staff. And to I think Mr. Demling's point, just I think agree again that the collaboration with the APA Executive Board and our subcommittee has been absolutely essential in this process. So I think bears worth repeating, or whatever that expression is. Sorry. Yeah, but I think it's a good point, so thank you.
Mr. Harrington?
Yeah, I might be asking this too prematurely, but I'm thinking back to there was the study that we saw earlier about certain students whose needs basically weren't being met previously. Are we doing anything in this to kind of prioritize some of those students along the way?
Yeah, so for the March 1st date, those students we'll give the option. They're already students who are in. So that's sort of already been pre-sorted. I think when we get to the March 15th, we want to prioritize students who are in the volunteer teachers' classrooms. And if there are spaces, which we don't know if there will be, because we don't know the response of those students, then we would want to prioritize in the way you said. And that's really why we're looking for the specialized programs, the students who are at Fort River who want to come in, and finding a site for them for all the reasons that you just mentioned, is that commitment to working with our students who have the least amount of access to remote learning.
Mr. Harrington?
As a follow-up, I just want to say on the record that I'm not trying to make anyone who works in the transportation side of this, I'm not trying to make their life any more difficult. I just realized that there's those implications.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things. I mean, the transportation for phase one, when it's talking about preschool and some primary grade classrooms at Crocker Farm, that's a lot easier phase. And then once we open up, more another class at Crocker and then classes at Wildwood, that's where it gets more complicated. And I think that's another benefit of the 2-week phase, is it helps our transportation team do that. So I'm with you.
Okay. So I just want I would restate something that Mr. Demling had said earlier, that as imperfect as this is, our current situation also is very imperfect. So it's not like, and I like the way you characterize that, it's not letting perfect get in the way of us making some progress here, and really appreciate the numbers of educators and paraeducators and staff that have responded to these surveys, and the cooperation and collaboration that we received from the executive board in pulling this together, including the side letters. I just want to try and sort of restate what you've explained is going to happen, and if you can make sure that I have it understood. So on approximately March 1st, a group of students that have been in the buildings in the fall will be returning, those that are at Crocker Farm and Wildwood. No, Crocker.
You want me to try to start again? Because I can do it more succinctly.
And from a holistic sort of date-wise, on this date, this group will be coming back. Yeah.
Sure. So on March 1st, we'll be looking for preschool students who want to be back, which is not everyone, to be back in for a partial day. There's a number of classrooms at the primary grade level at Crocker Farm that will also be invited to start on that day. And that's it for March 1st.
Okay.
On March 15th, the week later, we're still working on details exactly, pinning that down, but we've got a little bit of time. We'll add another intermediate class at Crocker Farm. We'll also open up Wildwood. By around the 15th, 22nd, or right around that window, we anticipate having 5 classrooms open at Wildwood. Also in that window, we'll be looking to open for students in one of the specialized programs at Fort River. It won't take place at Fort River, so just to be transparent about it, Crocker Farm is a known site because that's where our summer school program is. So, there's some advantages to thinking about more familiar terrain for staff and students in specialized program. Wildwood is literally the mirror image. So, from a space perspective, there's some advantages there. And there was a meeting today that I did not attend where the folks were trying to figure out those details. And so we anticipate being able to open some spaces for those students, or a limited number of students in the specialized program when we get to mid-March as well.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on the Amherst Elementary? Yep, okay. I think you can move on.
Okay, so at Pelham, this looks a little deceiving, again, because of confidentiality, but unfortunately, we do not have a sufficient number of staff members to open Pelham School. And so, sometimes it's not just the numbers, it's what roles those individuals play. So at the current time, we would not plan to open Pelham School anytime in March. Much like all the other districts, we would like to identify another time where we could allow for people who maybe didn't want to volunteer in March, but might be more interested in April to have one more chance. And not that there's a pressure, but we heard from some staff members that there was an interest in maybe as the weather gets warmer and, the potential of vaccines perhaps gets closer to do that. But at this point, we didn't have the staffing that we need to open Pelham School. So Chair Hall or anyone from Pelham, has a question, I'm happy to answer it. And not seeing any, I'm going to transition to the region. So at the middle school, we did have a number of staff members volunteer. The constellation of those staff members in terms of their roles, wouldn't formulate a team. This is not the case. I'm just going to use it. But like if you only had world language teachers, for instance, that wouldn't be, even if you had 4 or 5 people, you can't teach world language. I mean, you could teach world language all day. Maybe there's some benefit to that, but that's not really the goals of our programming or not how we're designed. So we're not able to open the middle school. Much like Fort River, we do have some staff members who work in some of the specialized programs that have not been open, the non-intensive needs specialized programs. And we'll be working on what that might look like and perhaps locating the students and staff at the high school because there already is staffing set up there. So we will be looking to see what's possible to have some of our specialized program students and staff return, perhaps not to the middle school, but to the high school where there's a lot of space and a lot of administrative staffing.
Any questions? Oh, sorry. Do you want to do the whole region first?
Yeah, if we can. It'll go pretty quick, I think. At the high school, I should note, and I neglected to say this about Wildwood, we have some students in the ILC, the intensive learning program at Wildwood and the middle school and the high school who volunteered to come back, and they're already back. That side letter was already agreed to. Some of those folks were chomping at the bit, and they came back last week. So that's included in these numbers, but because we have the distance learning center set up for intensive needs students at the high school, it's a little, it commingles the numbers a little bit in a way that for the audience is a little confusing. And once I start pulling that out, it starts getting identifiable. So I didn't, but I just want to note that. At the high school, very similar story to the middle school. Outside the intensive needs program, we do have staff who are willing to come back, but the constellation of who they are doesn't really set up a model. We are looking at both special education and ELL to see if we can set up some non-intensive needs distance learning center models in both those domains, given the teachers who are willing to come back. And we'll be working on those the next week or two. And we would anticipate, if we are able to put something together, again, that mid-March date to develop what that program looks like would be what we'd be aiming for. And finally, at Summit Academy, very similar numbers. We did want to explore if students need mental health support, can we offer it, in not a distance learning format, but just some in-person mental health support. So we're still exploring that. And again, more soon on that, but not enough staff to open the building. So that's, and I think the regional folks saw this. It's the same pre-K to 12. For staff who opted not to volunteer, there was a desire to wait for vaccination, family responsibilities. The voluntary piece gets really tricky because we had staff members who said yes, but only if my child can be back in. And so they didn't know the answer to that question. They're filling out the survey. So even some of those numbers can get affected by that. Safety concerns, of course, programmatic concerns, concerns about changing teachers, and again, concerns about whether returning would be against the union. Again, like I said last week, the union leadership has been true partners in this endeavor. And I understand the concerns there, but I do appreciate the leadership of the APA for working so collaboratively with us on that. And that's the end of this presentation.
Any questions? Mr. Demling?
So, I mean, I do always approach any return of staff as a positive step to increasing our in-person. But I am looking at the calendar, and we are starting to become closer to the end of the school year than the beginning. And so when we start talking about April plus returns, I'm just wondering, maybe this is a different answer at different districts or different grades or different types of classes, or if that's the case, I'd like to hear that. Does there come a point at which it's not practically feasible, given all the other associated things that need to occur to make sure that we're appropriately and safely staffed for a classroom? Because, like, as has been pointed out a couple times in the last few minutes, it's not just the teacher in the classroom. It's the paras, it's the admin, it's the facilities, it's the transportation and all the things that support that. Right? So if you just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, I don't think once you get to May, I think that's the threshold by which I think it's not. So invariably, if students return, it might involve a change in teacher for groups of students. And so once we cross that threshold and we get into May, I have a lot of concerns about, what that would mean. And let me be more explicit. So if some fourth grade teachers return and some don't, it might be a remixing of students along those dimensions. And so I think once we get beyond April, I think the cost benefits get very, very complex, both for the students and the staff members who have spent the whole year trying to build these relationships. So I think if there is another opportunity to come back, it would have to be in the month of April. I think once we get into May, I think all the, not just the work planning and getting folks back, I really am worried about what that looks like in actuality to our insurance students in the second to last month of school. So in my head, that's what we're working on. We did have this conversation in full disclosure with members on our volunteer return team, which includes 2 members of the executive board of the APA. I asked them to gather feedback from staff members, not beyond April, but just when in April seems, like we get the most likely to get folks returning, because I think that would be important information for me to consider in making a decision about what the second volunteer return date would be. So I'm sure I'll receive that feedback after the break, is what I imagine. And you know, a lot of our focus the next 2 weeks is getting this up and running, and then I think we will have to consider what that date is. But I think just the number of dominoes that would have to be triggered for students to return in May or June is very hard, and that's not to minimize the impact of in-person learning. I think I don't need to restate that. I don't think, but perhaps I do. It's really about the disruption to many kids' schooling experience for a more limited time at the very end of the school year. I think that'd be very challenging.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Demling.
I'm not trying to monopolize things, but if nobody else has. So before we move off this item, because this is the only opportunity to say this, you know, I did want to say again, and I've said this, you know, multiple times as well, but this is more of like a comment for the public as well. You know, this, you know, I think there could sometimes be a little confusion in principle or values about what we're talking about when we are so very focused on these efforts, various efforts to maximize in-person learning this year and next year, that it might come across that we don't value what's going on in remote learning. And I know that not just myself, but Dr. Morris and other members have said this at multiple school committee meetings, but not everybody watches every one of our marathon meetings. So I think it's just important to restate that. And so just the way I feel about it, you know, I feel like we have the best in class remote learning offered of any district that I'm aware of, and I've looked at a lot of them, and that's partly because of it's been really well designed and thoughtfully implemented by administration, but it's primarily because of the effort of our teachers, and for many students, remote is working well, and for some students, it's working exceptionally well. We've heard anecdotes of students in public comment about how it's working better than in person for them, and that's directly a result of teacher effort, and I you know, I've said for the last 4 or 5 years, you know, we have awesome schools because our teachers are awesome. That's why that is our differentiator. You know, when you come down to it, why is ARPS exceptional? It's because of our teachers and what we can do to, and I believe that as strongly as I do now as I did 5 years ago. You know. And so we have these students that are succeeding in remote. At the same time, we have literally hundreds of students that I would consider to be in crisis. And I think when you look at the quantitative attendance data that impacts our most vulnerable populations, and when you look at the record volume of public input that we've had over the last X number of months, you know, it's pretty conservatively hundreds. Now, whether that's 400 or 1,600 or 200, 800. The way I look at it doesn't really matter. The fact that we do have a large number of students that really need in person, and some of whom are benefiting very little from what is able to be provided at remote through no fault of our teaching staff, that's the driver, right? And so it's not an either or. We're not trying to close up, you know, remote shop right now, and it's more that's the driver. The what is true for some, what can be very true for some, that remote is exceptionally valuable, is definitely not true for all, and that's where my motivation comes from on this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Seeing none, I'm also gathering, and I'm just a state out loud. I'm not hearing any concern, well, I shouldn't say any concern, any objections to Dr. Morris moving forward with his plan as presented. Is that a correct statement? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have our school start times update. And I believe there was a presentation in our packet for that one too.
More slides, so I apologize. But let me bring up that one. Try to keep the theme similar. easier on the eyes. So really what I'd like to do tonight, especially because the next joint meeting is 2 weeks, or 2 weeks from now, which is potentially when the school committees will be taking a vote, is update the committees and the school start time survey and the results. This was shared with Jen Colkeen, who's the superintendent up in Union 28 as well. And I think she's going to share it with the committees up there. So again, there's no surprises here. We did have over 2,000 responses to the survey. What you'll notice is the responses that not everyone took the last question, which was the quote unquote, vote for the one you think is best for students. So I think there was 1,600 some odd people who answered that question, but we had a lot of interest. So I want to thank the community. I don't think we've ever passed the 2,000 responses mark in anything that we've ever done. So really appreciate the engagement of the larger community in this. And that community involves, secondary students. Elementary students did have the opportunity at the upper grades to have sessions with their principals, but I want to thank Dr. Guevara. She did some really strong outreach. Actually, here we go, with the Family Center. So these are some of the families who have the least, they're the most underserved in our community and the least amount of access. So she and her staff had individual sessions with a number of the families talking about this and gather their feedback in a qualitative way, which was really helpful to me. We had a session with our PGOs. Ms. Richardson had a session with the Bilingual Parent Advisory Group. I attended a session with the CPAC group. We had 7 staff sessions, large one, and then 1 follow-up at each of the buildings, 2 family information sessions, 1 with middle school, high school students. So you're seeing the survey results, but there was a lot of focus groups as well. And that's, I guess, what I want to stress. So sometimes you start, what I'm going to show you is a lot of numbers, but there was a lot of qualitative aspects of the engagement as well. So just to review, the 2 options we were looking at, option A is what we're familiar with. Buses get to the middle school and high school and Summit at 7:30, they leave at 2:20. 8:30-ish bus arrival at elementary, 3:10 departure. And the kind of one that we're exploring is the 8:10 bus arrival at elementary, 2:45-ish bus departure, 9:05 start at the secondary, 9-ish, and 3:30 dismissal. So again, because we don't know exactly who our students are going to be next year, that's why I have the ish part of my answer. But I think the more work we've done, and the transportation department's been phenomenal on this, looking at consolidating some bus stops, we feel like we can make up some time and make these routes work. So, we'll show the overall information, but we thought it was important to disaggregate all that. So I'm hate to read the slide, but I think I will, which is, the aggregate, but we also looked at just parent and guardian responses, just staff responses, just student responses, and then broke that down by students at the middle school, students at the high school. Folks who just responded from an elementary perspective, that was inclusive of parents, guardians, and staff, just looking at secondary responses. And then we also did a Leverett-Shutesbury response disaggregation as well, because we wanted to see how people felt across different groups. So the full set is like 160 some odd pages. I know we tried to send it to you early so you have time to look at all the feedback and comments, but there it is for everyone. It was emailed out to staff members earlier today as well. So for all responses, basically 75% of all responses supported a flip schedule, and about a quarter of responses wanted to revert to the way things were before the COVID schedule. Parent guardians were the group that felt strongest about this. You could see 81% in favor of the flip and about 19% not in favor. Staff members was still about 3 to 1, 72% in favor, 27%, 72% in favor of the flip, about 28%. The student responses were really interesting. So they were still in favor of the flip, not by the same margin. And if you read the comments, you'll see a lot of concerns about sports and extracurriculars. And so that was good feedback to us that we clearly didn't do a good enough job engaging students in some of the creative ways, the high school in particular is scheduling it. It's also worth noting at the middle school that half of the respondents were 7th graders who have never experienced an earlier start time. So that may skew results if you haven't lived it, right? That may be part of it. And had some conversation because of my non-job, but with some 7th graders who, in my opinion, might have been underestimating the impact of being at school at 7:30. And so, I don't say that to dismiss the responses we got, but just I think the context matters, and particularly as you look at the high school responses, there were many, many comments about sports and concerns about extracurriculars, which are real, but it is mitigated, we believe, by a number of other measures that folks are taking. So, that's something that if we do make this change, we'll have to do a lot better in terms of communicating to the student body on that topic. But regardless, all the groups were in favor of the flip in terms of the students, staff, and parents, guardians. Elementary only responses, you could see, slight difference in the aggregate, but still about spot on. Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. Almost exactly the same as the aggregate, about 75 and 25. And I actually did flip the slide, but the numbers are 1/100th difference between the elementary responses and the secondary responses to the question, which is kind of shocking if you think about that. It is worth noting that some people cover both, right? They maybe have a child in elementary school and child in secondary school, but I would not expect the difference to be 1/100th away from elementary and secondary. Leverett and Shutesbury were more, in the aggregate, were even more supportive of this flip. Reading the comments, because I was able to disaggregate a little more, note that they are often the earliest pickup at the secondary level. So when you think about all those before 7 in the morning pickups for secondary, a lot of them are in Shutesbury and Leverett, and that came through loud and clear in the survey, that they were supportive of the flip, and they experience the harshest of the early mornings. And then in the winter, in particular, where roads are bad, they have to picked up even earlier to make it to school on time. So comments about option B, clearly it was supported by every single disaggregated group. There was some concern about after school activities, which I mentioned, some concern about elementary parents and guardians' ability to adjust work schedules. They did note the sleep impact for adolescents. But the consensus was really that last bulleted point, which again, I apologize to read slides, but having a later start time at the secondary level is the right thing to do for students. And that really came through loud and clear in the, and many of you have read through the many comments. That was the consensus, that yes, there were going to be trade-offs. Yes, there were going to be complications that weren't perfect for everyone. But at its core, this was a really critical issue to students in terms of student well-being, and that it was worth the trade-offs that came with it. So, I've already been pretty clear, I think, with the community and with the committees that I was exploring it because I thought it was the right thing to do for students. And I feel even more so supportive of making the change given the survey results we got and also the high levels of engagement. This community can be a 60-40 community on any given set of issues, right? We can be 90-10 on anything happening outside our 4 towns, like presidential elections. And then we can be 60-40 on almost anything that's happening within our towns. And I think there's a lot of evidence of that. So I take very seriously that we're at a 75-25 split on this response. And that's not everyone. I don't want to minimize the students, staff, and families who feel differently, but it is more strongly in favor of anything than I would have predicted before I did the survey. So that's really where I am with this. I'd love to take questions, comments, and then maybe we could talk about what next steps may be in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. And I think, as you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, we are scheduled to come back to this with a potential vote on the 2nd of March, which is 2 weeks from tonight. I saw Ms. Spitzer's hand up.
I just want to start off by saying thanks for gathering all of this, especially for the folks who were involved in the qualitative work. And I think when I looked at the numbers, I actually had kind of a different interpretation than the one you had of the 25-75, which is that actually if you include the no responses, because we didn't give a I don't know or I'm unsure option. And I know there are reasons that you want to force a choice because it's an important question. It's good to know if people have strong feelings, what they are, but leaving that off has consequences. And I think it's worth noting that 30% of respondents didn't respond to that last question. And correct me if I'm wrong, like maybe there are people who didn't complete the survey and that's why we don't have, but I'm curious about like how many got to that question and didn't answer, because if my back of the envelope calculations are, it actually would be 30% of no response. And I'm gonna just, I see you have a response, but if it is that high, that there are these people who are feeling kind of on the fence, I think it's just something where I'd wanna get some of that qualitative feedback about like, where are these people who haven't quite come down and how can we support them in feeling secure with the option of moving forward with what I think is the clear winner. Like I'm not disagreeing that like moving the change in the start time seems like a good idea and seems like the option that has the most community support. But I think it's worth noting that there's a huge portion of our community who hasn't made the decision yet or doesn't feel like yay or nay on it. And I think we need to work with them to figure out what we can do to help support them in this transition if we vote to make it happen. I know we haven't made the vote. But anyways, that was, if you have any feedback from the qualitative interviews that could kind of shed some light on that population or that group of people, I'd be interested.
Yeah, I think some of that group is people who filled out like one or two of the questions and then just didn't complete, and we get a fair number of that on every single survey that we do. So, you know, I don't think it's all people who got to the survey and said, I don't know, I'm just going to skip the question, right? If you look at the number of the questions before and how many were skipped, it's a non-zero number. So I think the larger point you make is a really important and valid one, but I think on the technical one, that's what I'd share. And I think in terms of the feedback we got from BPAP, from CPAC, and from the Family Center, the qualitative was very much in favor. You know, I think at CPAC, they talked about formally supporting the change in start times. The Family Center was overwhelmingly supportive in terms of the qualitative. So, you know, I think it's hard to parse the data. You know, SurveyMonkey is a good tool. It's not a perfect tool in terms of the question you asked, but I know that there was a significant number of people who skipped some of the earlier questions as well. So it's a little hard to know if it was, I clicked the link, I see what the survey is, and yes, I clicked to open it, and I might have filled out one part of the first one, my demographic, and looked at it and said, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to come back later. Because we did scan for repeat entries, like the same IP address or, you know, anything like that. Like, you know, only looking for like an N size greater than 4. Because multiple, you know, people who live in the same household might feel really differently. And we didn't see multiples like that, but there were lots of multiples of 1 or 2, and that may have been because people logged in, said, there's a longer survey that I have time for right now, and came back to it. So it is a little bit mixed in terms of that. But I think the larger point you make is a really important one and just as valid, regardless of what I just said.
Staying on that point, I think it's the, you know, you didn't have the choice of either or, you know, indifference, right? So we actually can't assume anything about the people who didn't answer that particular question, whether you know, even about whether they're concerned and didn't want to answer, or whether they actually are equally in favor of either one and don't have a strong enough opinion. But I do wonder if you're able to pull just the open-ended responses and filter out people who didn't answer that question, what were their open-ended responses in the survey, which I think would answer the question to like help us understand sort of maybe, are they really, you know, can they see positive in both approaches and don't really have a vote, right? Or have a preference either way? Or is it that there's significant concerns and questions?
Yeah. So that is possible. What I did was we did look and just track the responses in general, and they pretty much did align to the 3/4, 1/4, positive to negative, in terms of on about option B. So, you know, that was we do have the capability on SurveyMonkey to do that disaggregation, but just, you know, and I don't have the count, but, you know, 2 of us got together and we did look at it, and we did sort of see that same trend lines of positive to negative responses, or negative to positive as we look at option A. So I think there is some secondary data that's supporting the larger quantitative numbers, but, you know, I think there's lots of different ways to cut it, and the more we dig in, the better off we are.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Demling.
So, you know, my question about this has always been, can we responsibly implement it? I've been pretty clear that I think we should do this for a while, and that I'm glad to see the survey responses. I actually didn't think it was going to be that high. So that is I'm pleasantly surprised to see that in a very large survey. If you could flip back to the focus groups that you did, I'm kind of interested in hearing a little bit more about that, particularly with some of the groups like Family Center and BPAC and we don't hear from a lot of these groups directly at the school committee level often. We had an awesome Family Center presentation like a year and a half ago, which we should do like every year. They do amazing things over there. But I would be interested in those conversations. And yeah, that was my first question.
Yeah, so I really want to thank Dr. Guevara and her staff. I'll start with Family Center. So what they were able to do is they contacted, I think it was, I don't have the number in front of me, but about 12 or 13 families that they interact with quite frequently, who, for a whole host of reasons, were less likely to fill out a survey. You know, and out of confidentiality, I won't go into the reasons why. And I think what was so beneficial is they went through it and actively explained, here's the options in a very neutral way, and we're able to answer some questions that came up, and there was a lot of support for it. And I think a lot of the support comes from families at the secondary level who they're underserved in our community, and the fact that they are struggling with their child to get them on a bus before 7 o'clock or at 7 o'clock to get to school is yet another stressor in their lives. It's also the case that for some families without transportation, missing the bus means the kid misses school, right? So, we looked at that tardy data the other time. We talked about this, and that assumes that there's transportation, that if the bus rolls by and you're not outside, that you have a way to get to school. And that's not true for all of our families. And it's a really important point, and that came through also anecdotally in some of the data. BPAC, I was with you all, so I wasn't able to attend that, but Ms. Richardson did talk to families, and they were all supportive at the BPAC meeting. I described a little bit at CPAC. There was some good clarifying questions. I have heard, not necessarily exclusively about special needs, about students who advocate for not having a core course in their A period class at the secondary level, either because of disability or because of other factors that makes it very challenging to attend a class like that. And as I mentioned, as a body, they were comfortable publicly supporting the change. So, I like those. I mean, it's all fun to look at data, but, actually being able to interact with folks or having Dr. Guevara recount that and her staff wrote up a full document for me of their conversations is just as valuable, even if this N size is smaller. To your point, it's not a population we always hear from, or those are not populations we always hear from. And so, really took a lot of staff members to organize that, but I think it's been really valuable as part of the process.
Other comments or questions? Anybody else? Yes. Mr. Demling.
Sorry. We've been building up this for so long. It's so exciting. So let's go down through every 1,500 comments and dissect. No. So in terms of responsible implementation, right? What I was hoping that the survey would uncover qualitatively, and it did, what are the specific concerns? Okay, and so I don't need you to give us a solution to every one of them, but if you could just hit on a couple of the big ones that came up a lot, and I'm thinking about like sports and impact to work schedules for elementary families. There are others that are very interesting that we could talk about, but in terms of like thorny issues that you have spent time thinking about, how could we address this? Can you talk a little bit about what those solutions look like?
Yeah, so when we get to the logistics, I'll start with transportation because that's the biggest one. Our transportation team has been actively working on looking at bus stops that can be consolidated to both decrease time on buses, decrease route time, which allows us to shrink that window between the runs. And also, it's much greener for the world, right? The more time the bus stops and starts, the worse it is for our carbon emissions. So that team's been actively working on that. I think from a staff end, we've been working to look at what schedules might work that have the least amount of change for the staff hours now, knowing that that's going to have an impact on not just our teachers and paraeducators and clerical, but all of our staff members. So, if this vote passes, we will be entering into impact bargaining to try to work out some of those details. But we think we've got good feedback from staff members on kind of what we can do. For instance, at the secondary level, we'd look to perhaps have faculty meeting at the beginning part of the day because staff will be in earlier than students, which is, one of the things we've heard from other districts is widely supportive, and it actually reduces the amount of time staff have to stay after, which is hard for some secondary staff members, given family and other commitments. Similarly, at the elementary level, may try to not change the teacher schedule much at all, and again, have a longer window at the end of the day for meetings instead of trying to squeeze in meetings right at 8 in the morning. So those are the types, some of those are logistical. At the secondary level, last week, the high school administration rolled out a schedule they're looking to gather feedback on that would have a block at the end of the day that is a little more flexible so that it would have a lower impact on athletics and other extracurricular events, activities. And those who've been to the high school know that most of our high school students do not take the bus home at the end of the day. And so trying to think through how would we manage that? What would a late bus look like? Those are the details, but I think the big thing on the front of my head is actually the transportation, because we really got to map out what those routes would look like, communicate with our partners in Shutesbury and Leverett and their elementary schools, and see if we can, again, shrink that time a bit so that we're able to get everybody where they need to be at the time they need to be there. So those are a lot of the things that all of those in different ways came up on the survey. I had the advantage of attending almost all of the focus groups and hearing them directly. Also the advantage of being able to disaggregate the comments section, which made that analysis a little bit easier. So those are the big ones that come up, and that's why we asked for a vote in early March, so we'd have time to work through those well before the beginning of the next school year.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah, just a reminder that Shutesbury and Leverett, even though we're not bystanders in this, our elementary start times are going to change with this also, even though, yes, our regional students will benefit, but it's also going to change the schedules for our elementary students.
Any other questions? If not, then did you want to talk about next steps, Dr. Morse?
Yeah, so the next regional or next joint meeting is in 2 weeks, I believe, March 2nd. I'm remembering in my calendar, that is correct. And so what I'd like to do is to have this considered and voted one way or the other at that date, so that we have time to do all the logistical work that, Mr. Demling's question just kind of evoked in terms of response. It's a lot of work. As I said, fortunately, Northampton is doing the same work. And so it's an advantage of that. There's 2 other local communities that have talked about perhaps making this change for next year. And frankly, a couple of communities that are quietly having the conversation, but not in public yet, so I won't mention it. So I do think, hopefully there is a cadre of schools in Western Massachusetts making a change around the same time and similar changes. And so I just wanted to note that, that timeline works well, and we've already been in touch with Northampton an awful lot. And I think the more we can go through this together, the better off the implementation will be, both in Northampton as well as in Amherst and the region.
Did you say that there were 2 other districts that are publicly having this same conversation?
It's been mentioned. They're not having the conversation as explicitly as we're having it. So I'm just a little hedging, because I don't know if it's been more in superintendent update, but 2 other districts in Hampshire County. And the more districts that make that change, or at least consider a change, if we go about it, actually the easier the change gets in terms of all the extracurriculars and all the kind of athletics. So, I think the science is obviously next to impossible to argue with in terms of the benefits for our secondary students. It's all the challenges of the logistics, and there's some power in numbers in terms of other districts taking part. So we're happy to partner with at least Northampton, and hopefully we get some more partners as well.
Okay. So if there's no more comments on that, we'll come back to that in our future agenda planning. And next up is our school year calendar for 2021-2022. And there were, I think, 2 options in our packet.
There are. My computer's freezing. So hold on.
I think while you're trying that, I just to restate, I think are we looking to vote on this tonight, or have the conversation and about any adjustments? Did we lose Dr. Morris?
Yeah, he looks frozen to me.
So while he's trying to get connected, I'll try to pull up the calendar myself. Just a second. Are folks seeing my screen with the agenda? Okay. I'll try to make this bigger. So in the document, I obviously don't have Dr. Morris's preamble for this, but as I understand it, there were 2 options that were included in our packet. This first option, it appears to me that they differ primarily in what the start of school is, and relatedly what the last day of school would be, or the latest and earliest last days of school. So this first version has school starting on the 30th of August, and for kindergarten, pre-K and kindergarten first day of school on the 2nd of September. In that scenario, the earliest last day of school, or sorry, the last day of school would be June 23rd, and that includes 5 snow days. So the earliest possible would be June 15th. That's including the Juneteenth holiday on Monday, June 20th. The second option has the first day of school on Friday, September 3rd, with pre-K and K first day of school on the 8th of September. And in that scenario, the last day of school would be June 30th, which is a Thursday, and including 5 snow days. And June 23rd would be the earliest possible last day.
Allison, I'm sorry about the computer issue. I could share the context of why we look at the calendars, how it goes. Sorry. Came to the office so I'd avoid computer problems and best laid plans. And so we always come up with multiple calendar options. We share it as per our contract that any start date that involves staff, APA staff coming back before September 1st needs to be voted by their membership. So the 2 options we have this year has that option. That's the later option. And then an earlier option. We took the feedback the first time we talked about this. There was a concern about Yom Kippur being, or Rosh Hashanah, excuse me, being on the potentially on the first day of kindergarten. So that's not in any of the options in terms of the first day of Rosh Hashanah being on that. And, I think it's worth noting we've added some days off in terms of Juneteenth, 3 Kings Day. And so that's either going to push the calendar earlier or later. I always have a preference of earlier, but we'll see. We always gather feedback from our membership, and the membership is actively soliciting feedback, and we'll wait to hear from them. But I know people are really looking anxious to understand when students will be returning when school will be starting, just bluntly, in the fall. So, something we can come back to 2 weeks from now, and then the school committee takes a vote. But at this meeting is really just if there's any feedback or questions the committee has, and I can bring that back to Debbie Westmoreland, who is our expert calendar maker. But, you see the two options, and any questions or comments I can bring back to her.
Does anybody have any questions or thoughts, comments? Ms. Spitzer?
I just wanted to point out that this includes the change in time, or the early release times. And I'm just wondering how, I'm assuming those are going to change if we make a vote. So I'm just wondering if maybe we should leave them off until that's determined, just so we don't inadvertently give people the wrong information that's going to change in a short period of time.
Great feedback. I think that makes sense.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Demling?
Just briefly, so I agree with Ms. Spitzer's comment, and I like the earlier calendar. The idea of getting out on June 30th or potentially later. I mean, this is New England. We can have more than 5 snow days. I've had 3 kids go through elementary, and man, those June 20 days, 20X days, those are some hard days, and I just think, so I don't love the idea of contemplating scheduling for June 30. It just seems pretty darn like people already kind of struggle with focus, naturally, with human attention once we hit June, and I just think anything we do to combat that is good.
I would second that or share that sentiment. I think it's also challenging because summer programming for a lot of families also begins at about that same time, and so that it sort of bumps into summer plans. But also on the flip side, starting school on a Friday in September could also be challenging for that last week of summer vacation that bleeds into that. So I also would favor the earlier start. Any other comments, questions? Not seeing any. Oh, did we lose Dr. Morris again? Oh, there you are. You moved. You were at the bottom of my screen, now you're at the top. Okay, so as I understand that, we would be voting at that in about 2 weeks. Is that correct? The region. Okay. Which brings us to our next agenda item anyway, which is future agenda planning. So the Amherst School Committee is meeting next week, and I believe the agenda is, if it hasn't been posted, it will be posted. That meeting and agenda will be posted very soon. We have, for the Amherst School Committee meeting, a budget update on Q2, a preliminary budget for next year, our school choice hearing, a continued discussion on the Commandantess enrollment policy, and a discussion on capital requests. There's time to change if anybody has anything that they want to add. And then on the 2nd of March, 2 weeks from tonight, we have tentatively another joint meeting of our 3 committees where we'll be taking potentially a vote on the school start times change, a potential vote on that school calendar that we just looked at, an update. It looks like you just added, Dr. Morris, pooled testing, and potentially a region-only topic on the FY22 budget and capital. But does that have to be on the 2nd, or could that be on the 9th? I feel like that would be on the 9th.
Yeah, I agree.
Ms. Spitzer.
I believe at one point there was a conversation about having a meeting on Thursday, the 25th. I'm assuming that we've rolled those topics into other days then. Just wanted to confirm.
Yes, good point. Yes, thank you. We rolled most of those into tonight. And the one of them we moved later, I think was the plan. Mr. Demling.
It might be getting late, so you may have already said this, but did you already say Amherst School Committee budget for FY22?
Yes.
Okay.
Next week.
Okay. The other thing, and this doesn't have to be immediate, but I did want to get superintendent's or committee's interest in having an item where we talk about how we teach the history of slavery in U.S. history in our districts all through the grades. So this might be a joint meeting. I'm sure a number of you have seen the disturbing news that there are some state legislature bills, not in Massachusetts, but going through in some states to pull funding from school districts that teach the 1619 project, the groundbreaking Pulitzer Prize winning journalism that teaches the history of slavery, which, AKA U.S. history, and all the things that, that even in liberal Massachusetts, we weren't taught. And it just really made me think about, well, how are we teaching U.S. history and the history of slavery in our schools? And I don't honestly fear that our state is going to impose controls on us, but it is an opportunity, a timely one, to talk about what we do and what we value and how we approach those topics at the different grade levels, because I know it is evolved and different. So if that was something we were able to fit into the very busy agenda this year, I think that would be great.
I wonder if that might be appropriate for the time when we hear the proposals for new courses. Maybe not. And Ms. Lord, did you have another?
I also think that might tie nicely in with the anti-racism curriculum education that a lot of our district teachers and paras are working on cultivating and crafting.
Great suggestion. We also we don't have specific dates on that. We pushed out the CPAC annual report presentation. They needed more time on that. And we have tentatively also on the March 9th for the regional school committee, a second budget hearing, as well as the middle school grade span report and next steps conversation and discussion there. Ms. Lord also had brought forth an agenda item for, I'm going to say this wrong, Indigenous lands. Is that a resolution or acknowledgement of Indigenous lands?
Yes.
Yeah. And so we had tentatively talked about having that in April. The regional school committee, right now we have tentatively slotted for April 6th. So that could be coming up then. Any other things? And so just back to the question from Mr. Demling about the Amherst School Committee budget, that budget, preliminary budget will be discussed at next week's meeting of the Amherst School Committee, and tentatively on the 16th of March is when we would have our budget hearing and hear more detail on adds and cuts for the Amherst School Committee budget. Ms. Dancer.
Just a question, I guess. At some point, is the region going to come back to the 4 towns and assessment stuff? Is that something that has to happen at the region, or is that just gonna, if we pass the budget, does it then just disappear?
Yeah, so we have so the budget, a second budget hearing would be at the region on the 9th, and potentially a vote on the 23rd at the Regional School Committee. And Dr. Morris, I saw your hand up also.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the budget hearing probably typically gets more attention for people concerned about ads or cuts, but I think in this case, I think it needs to be a hearing as it relates to assessment method as well. Because I think you're spot on, and I've been having communications with member towns who have reached out to me, but I think at that point we really do need to have a public conversation about it.
Great. Any other questions or loose ends that we? No. And other than and actually it's only Tuesday. The next week's Amherst School Committee is not carved in stone yet, but that one will be posted. But obviously, there's still time. So if anything occurs to you, or even if it's something that you want to place out in the future, always feel free to email me for region topics or for Amherst topics. Okay. Moving along, we next up is gifts, and I don't believe we have any gifts this evening.
We do actually. I think you can turn it over to Ms. Hall, Chair Hall. I think there is a gift for Pelham.
Oh.
It was it was the last page of the packet, I believe.
I'm not seeing it in mine. The packet that was circulated.
Yeah, I have calendar as the last page of
Yeah, mine ends at the calendar.
I think Sasha may have updated it because a gift came in. So if you click, I think I just put that same link that Carrie did. But if you click on that and you go to page 38, I believe there is a gift waiting for Pelham to approve if they so choose to. It's one that's been waiting for a while.
Oh, that gift. Okay. Yes. Oh, so yes, I had not seen this. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. I never know how to do this. I move to accept gift from Ronald Menino for the 3rd grade classroom for $1,000. Is that a good enough motion? Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Well, before we vote, that is a very generous gift, and thank you to Ronald Menino, whoever that is. He seems lovely, and we're lucky that he gave a gift. Any further discussion? Okay, do a roll call vote. Mr. Menino.
Aye.
Ms. Stanton.
Aye.
Ms. Barlow.
Aye.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny, aye.
And Hall, aye. Thank you, Ron.
Great. And warrants is next up. So I will look to see, Ms. Spitzer, do you have any for the region?
I do have one. I actually have it up. I, Carrie Spitzer, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $154,137.44 for the warrant dated February 11th, 2021. This included general fund expenses of $152,782.11, revolving fund expenses of $1,145.25, and grant fund expenses of $210.08. I signed this on February 11th, 2021.
Okay. I have one for Amherst. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $62,785.98 for a warrant dated February 12th, 2021. It included general fund expenses of $40,724.65, revolving fund expenses of $16,943.20, grant fund expenses of $2,255.35, FEMA fund of $261.26, school reopening fund and $1,265, CARES Act funds of $1,190.94, and a gift to the schools of $145.58. and I signed that on February 13th. Chair Hall, do you have any for Pelham?
I don't have any tonight, thanks.
Okay. Excellent. So I will now move to adjourn the Amherst School Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, second by Spencer. There's no discussion on this. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
And McDonald, aye. And Chair Hall?
All right, just really quickly before Pelham adjourns, a reminder that the current Union 26 reps from Pelham are Mr. Menino, Ms. Stancer, and myself. So it's been a while. Just want to make sure everyone who knows to stay on. All right, I move to adjourn the Pelham School Committee. Or is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Hall. Who seconded?
Me.
Seconded by Barlow. All right, Ms. Barlow.
Aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Mr. Menino?
Menino, aye.
And Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Hall, aye. Pelham is adjourned.
All right, Ms. McDonald, Ms. Hall, if it's okay with you, I will call to order the Union 26 School Committee. Seeing the presence of a quorum, I'll call to order the Union 26 School Committee, and I know you're all present, but we have to do it anyway. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Menino?
Menino present.
Yeah, not a vote, a roll call. Ms. Stancer?
Stancer present.
Ms. Hall?
Hall present.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer present.
Ms. McDonald?
McDonald present.
Demling present. Okay, and I will immediately move that the Union 26 School Committee enter into executive session to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for contract negotiations with non-union personnel, Superintendent Michael Morris, with no intention of returning to open session. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved by Demling, seconded by Hall. And we will do a roll call vote. Ms. Hall?
Hall, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Menino?
Menino, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. McDonald?
McDonald, aye.
And Demling, aye. 6-0. We are now in executive session for Union 26.
If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigation position of the public body and the chair so declares, and I do declare, with no intention of returning to open session. Is there a second? From the region.
Second.
Moved by McDonald, second by Harrington, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Seeger? Oh, sorry, Ms. Spitzer? And my cheat sheet. Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. So we will now move into executive session for both committees.